Christians, I have a question. In the Bible, there's the gospel according to Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. But where's the gospel according to Jesus? I can't find it.
The gospel according to Jesus. Why don't we have that gospel? Why do we only have 4 gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John? Do we need a gospel according to Jesus? Let's answer these questions. So in order to start, we actually have to figure out exactly what the 4 Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are. Well, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are eyewitness testimonies and or secondary testimonies, meaning they learned the information from a person who did see the events and then wrote these things down from their own perspectives. And they dictate the life and really ministry of Jesus Christ over the course of about 3 to 3.5 years. Obviously with dictation of his birth and early childhood events like, when he was 12 years old talking to the religious leaders and his parents left him in the city and all that stuff like that. I know what a lot of people are going to do. Well, these are not eyewitness accounts. See, I've done the research. These are not eyewitness accounts. But here's the problem, though. The Gospels disagree with you. In the Gospel of John, chapter 21, verse 24, we read the following. This is the disciple who is bearing witness about these things and who has written these things, and we know that his testimony is true. And then for the secondary source, we have Luke chapter 1, verses 1 through 3, which says, Inasmuch as many have undertaken to compile a narrative of the things that have been accomplished among us, just as those who from the beginning were eyewitnesses and ministers of the word have delivered them to us. He continues by saying, It seems good to me also, having followed all things closely for some time past, to write an orderly account for you, most excellent Theophilus. Not only does it appear that the author of the Gospel of John considered himself to be a participant in the events of the Gospel, but also the eyewitness account that would then write these things down. Now, even if the author of Luke is not an eyewitness in and of himself, he definitely believed he was being told true history by a direct eyewitness. I'll do you one better. Not only did he believe he was being told true history by an eyewitness of these events of Jesus Christ, but he then turned around and thought it was important enough to tell a third-party individual. Now, herein lies the first pitfall for many, many different skeptics. They're going to do one Google search and say, see, there is no eyewitness testimonies in the Gospels. They were not written by eyewitness testimonies. But here's the problem. You can't always just do one search and then conclude from there. Just for kicks and giggles, I went ahead and Googled it myself. Are the Gospels eyewitness accounts? And this is the first thing that came up. While the Gospels are traditionally seen as eyewitness accounts, scholarly consensus suggests they are more likely based on oral tradition and theologies of their communities rather than direct eyewitness accounts. Now notice one thing. This is a compilation of information from different websites, and these websites are linked right here. Now, if you click on it, you'll actually find the websites listed very plainly. The first is the Bart Ehrman blog, and the second is a YouTube channel by Dan McClellan. These are 2 individuals who are very well known in the sense of biblical scholarship, and neither one of them are already individuals who believe in the events that took place. They have biased, presuppositional, naturalistic skepticism before they've even talked about it. I don't know if you've seen some of the things they've talked about, but it's kind of crazy the conclusions they've come to. But it isn't just them who thinks this. It's the majority of scholarship in this field. They are already not believers in the perspective of the Gospels, even though the Gospels directly disagree with them. They're already saying, I don't agree with that. I'm not going to agree with spiritual revelation being dictated through individuals who claim to be eyewitnesses. I can't agree with that, therefore I won't agree with that. And what's worse is that individuals who have done no research, who don't care enough to do research, do one little Google search, and boom, they're convinced because, well, Google told them. Now, this does lead to the second question that many skeptics have, and that's, well, if the logical train leads me to the idea that I can't really trust one Google search from an already established skeptic on the Bible who doesn't agree with the Bible, well then, how come the Gospels don't all coincide with their dictations? There's stories in one, and there's stories in another, and they don't line up. Well, here's the thing. They're 4 testimonies of the same story. You're not always going to get the same exact testimony, but the conclusion is always going to be the same if it's true. And that's what you find in the Gospels. The structure of the Gospels, the whole point of the Gospels, according to Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, is to dictate the necessity of salvation because of the fall of mankind. Now, not only about salvation, but we also learn the necessities of the true actions of a Christian. We learn about morals. We learn about baptism and why baptism's even there to begin with. We learn about different things that happen that are historically accurate, that are rectified and noted by different scholars outside of the Bible. Again, the skeptic is going to sit there and say, well, these stories don't line up because they're not actually telling the same story in the exact same way about these events. But again, That's not how you do a full consensus and come to a conclusion about whether something is true. I'll give you a for instance here. So when the crucifixion of Jesus Christ happens at pretty much the end of all four Gospels, we see a particular detail that is in some Gospels but completely omitted from others. In the Gospel of Matthew and Mark, we see that when Jesus was put on the cross with two thieves next to him, the thieves started by reviling and mocking Jesus. But then one of them turns and repents by the end before his death. However, in the Gospel of Luke, we actually see that both thieves were up on the crosses next to Jesus. Neither one is regarded as mocking him, but yet still one of them repents and is saved. Then you cut to the Gospel of John, which accounts for two thieves on the crosses next to Jesus. It doesn't account for either one of them mocking Jesus, and it doesn't account for either one of them being saved. But yet we know it happened because of the dictation of the testimony of the other Gospels. And this is one of the primary reasons why all four Gospels are in Scripture. It's not just Matthew, it's not just Mark, it's not just Matthew and Mark, it's Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Because you can have a fuller picture from all four testimonies that paint a well-rounded picture. I'll give you another for instance. The other day, this is an actual true story, I actually talked to my dad for about 30 minutes about a building project that he's doing. Now, him and my mom both went to a shop and was looking at materials and costs and all of that. Both my mom and dad were there. I got the story from my dad, and the next day I talked to my mom. I asked her about the same thing. She told me the same story. But there was differing perspectives because it's two different people in the same event. You're going to see different things. You're going to experience different things. You're going to hear certain things. You're not going to retain other things. And so even though both people didn't tell me the exact beat for beat same story, it was the same story. They were accounting for the same event from their perspective. I will say this, the only reason why we would have any grounds to actually question the validity of the Gospels is if they had contradictory information. And the only way you can have contradictory information is if you don't read the other Gospel. Neglecting to write down a particular part of the event is not the same thing as writing down a completely different event in that time frame. The Gospel of Matthew said that Jesus Christ was put up on a cross and then was taken down. He was still alive and he walked away totally unscathed. That would be a contradiction from what the other Gospels say, which is that he died on that cross. I'm finally getting to the answer of this question after 7+ minutes. Why don't we have a Gospel according to Jesus? Well, because we already have four Gospels that dictate the events of what was going on. Plus, if you have one Gospel being written by one person and one person only who really didn't have time to write a Gospel to begin with, wouldn't you want to believe four other individuals who all attest to the same events and the same things that were taking place rather than just one guy? I mean, let's say that I was in a plane crash and I walked in and said, hey, I pulled 4 people out of that plane crash. I was there for it and I saved them. I'm a hero. Well, you're going to look at me like I've got 5 heads and 6 arms. What are you talking about? But if 4 people come in, one of which wasn't even an eyewitness, but heard the story from a different person entirely, and they all said, no, he pulled 4 people out of that plane and he's a hero, you're going to have more grounds to believe me. So in the end, why we don't have the Gospel according to Jesus is because we already have 4 Gospels according to these 4 individuals who were either there or heard the story from another person. And really the question of, do we need a Gospel according to Jesus is answered very plainly. No, we don't, because we already have the events written down. These events are not better attested for if the person themselves is writing it down. It only makes it more suspicious, especially if that individual didn't have time and that individual is the only person talking about it.